All right. I'm talking to Steve Lynch of Autograph today. Pretty psyched about it and just can't wait to get into this.
All right. Thanks for having me on, Colin. Appreciate it.
Yes, yes, sir. All right, let's talk about the reason we met first. Steve Lynch, Confessions of a Rock Guitarist. What inspired you to write this book and what can fans expect from the book?
Well, what inspired me to write it was all the different things I'd gone through in my life. And when I told my stories to other people, they all of them always said you got to write a book about this. So about 15 years ago, I started writing down single sentence reminders of all these different stories so that I would be able to remember them, that just one sentence would remind me exactly what the story was. But there were so many of them, I wrote down those little reminders. And by the time, like COVID hit is when I started writing it. I had over 200 lines, so 200 stories. So obviously I had to cut that back a little bit, quite a bit actually.
Yeah.
But then when COVID hit, I couldn't tour, I couldn't teach, I couldn't really do anything. And so I decided, well, this is the time. I didn't know how long it was going to last, but I thought I'll start my book now. And so I did, and that was March of 2000. And I wrote for a couple of years, and I finished it. But I, I, back then, everything was going so slowly with the publishers and everything. And
Right.
then it was a good thing that it kept on getting delayed because of the fact that it's release delayed because of the fact that so many other things happened. I mean, I met the love of my life, Suzanne, and got
Mhm.
engaged to her, at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, which, that happened as well.
Yeah.
Me donating, my guitar and of course Randy's bass in there and some other memorabilia, and there. So that was a big event, and then also like basically coming to an agreement on the whole lawsuit thing, which I don't really want to get into, but that
Cool.
came out that came out very, very favorable. So I'm really happy about that. And then so and then now we're just nearing that part of my life where solidifying the whole Sony agreements that the albums will be back out there and all the songs will be available for streaming again. So just now, in the final process of getting that taken care of. And so, once I started writing it, I thought, okay, I have to put all of these stories in chronological form. So I started writing just from the very beginning, and it was all that I could remember. Plus, I'd have to call up my older sister and make sure that I got
Sure.
everything right. And but I remembered most of it because I just remember telling the story so many times to different people, friends and relatives and fans. And so I pretty much knew exactly what they were anyway. It's a whole different thing when you need to write it down and put it into a book. So I did it, and I'm really proud of it. It's doing very well.
Yeah, happy to hear that. And so
Thank you.
let's start at the beginning then. What was the spark? I mean, I can tell you mine, but for you, what was that spark that got you into music where you knew this is what I want to do, this is where I need to end up?
Well, it was initially the Beatles, because that was, my mom listened to Elvis and everything. I loved Elvis and all that, but she was a huge fan. And my dad would listen to Johnny Cash and Merle Haggard and all that, and Charlie Pride. And I really liked that stuff as well. But I gravitated more towards the rock and roll thing. And then what really got me into wanting to play guitar really bad was when Hendrix's Are You Experienced album came out in 1967. And I went, oh, ditto. I was only 12 years old then, just turning into 13. And so that's when I got a bass guitar actually, because there's already a guitar player that lived down the block from me.
Yeah.
But I really wanted to play guitar. And so when Jimi Hendrix passed away, that's when I switched from guitar or from bass over to guitar. And that was September 18th, 1970. And I never looked back. I just kept going. So what's that? 50, you know,
Yeah, 55
what is
years
that?
now.
60 years ago, you
Yeah.
know? So,
Yes.
or
So it was
no,
Hendrix
50,
that yes,
55 years ago. Thank you.
yeah. Yeah.
That's
So
correct.
but Hendrix
Yeah.
guitar playing and what and when he died, that was the moment for you, or
Pardon me?
when Hendrix passed away, that was when you knew you wanted to do guitar?
Yeah, I always really did want to anyway, but then it kind of really made up my mind when he passed away because I just listened to it constantly. And I
Yeah.
wanted to play like that, and I continue to do so. Once I switched over to guitar permanently on that date, September 18th, 1970. Well, that's the only thing I did was try to learn Hendrix and the early Led Zeppelin and of course the Pink Floyd stuff and
Yeah.
everything Jeff Beck was doing. And so
Mhm.
that was kind of like, and the Allman Brothers as well.
Of course.
Excuse me. Um, so that was my bowl of cereal was those guys, and so that's what I learned everything by ear, and so that's why I basically started out. And then 3 years later, after I started, I was in my first band, when I was 18, 1973, and started going out playing professionally and been doing it ever since. So,
Yeah. One thing I learned when I was researching for this interview, something unique about you is you put out a book before you were even a household name about the art of two-handed guitar or guitar tapping. Talk to me about that. Well, I mean, why was that something you wanted to do at such a young age?
oh, that whole technique, you mean?
Yeah,
Well,
because
what
that was
happened
such
was,
an unknown saying.
yeah, well, what happened was, there was a guy in Seattle named Steve Buffington, and he did a little bit with it. He showed me a couple of things, and then there was Harvey Mandel, who was a very popular blues player back then, and I saw him playing around with it. So I started toying around with it too. It's probably about 1974, 75, right around in there. And I didn't develop it very far, but I got the basic idea of what they were doing, and so I played around with it. And then when I went to the Guitar Institute, in March of 1978, soon after I started. Um, this guy Emmett Chapman did a clinic there. Who was the inventor of the Chapman stick that you play with both hands on the same fingerboard, but your left hand plays on lower register strings. The thicker was like a bass guitar, and then your right hand plays on the thinner strings. So you got your left hand comping, and then your right hand doing all the solo stuff and the melodies. And when I watched that clinic, I just thought, wow, it's so amazing that he's actually doing it on two completely separate sets of strings. And so I asked him after the clinic, I said, you had mentioned during the clinic that you started off on guitar and you went so far with it that you decided to invent this instrument. But I said, what were you doing on guitar? And so he said, well, let me see your guitar. And so I handed it to him. And he said, here's the pentatonic over here with your left hand. And here's another position over here with your right hand. And he just went, and I just went, God, that's it. So I started writing down what I was learning in the school, all the pentatonic positions, all the major scale positions, chord inversions, arpeggios, triads, interval skips, all that kind of stuff. And I wrote it all down two-handed and started mixing different arpeggios together, triads and everything. And I had a stack like that by the time I finished the school. It was like, a 3 or 4 inch stack of papers. And so when I played at the graduation ceremony. I kept it kind of hush hush, while I was practicing that technique at the school. And but when I played at the graduation ceremony in March of 1979, well, I played a couple of songs and it was all two-handed stuff, and people were going, "What? What are you doing?" And then I got a really good response from that from the teachers and the students watching it. So um, after I got done playing, Howard Roberts, who was like the number one guy in LA for doing all the studio work, for all the guitar work on everything from the 50s, 60s, and 70s. I mean, every cartoon or advertisement or TV show or movie, that was him playing guitar on it. You know what I mean? I mean, thousands and thousands of sessions. So sometimes he'd do 4 or 5 sessions a day. You know what I mean? So that's how busy he was all through those decades. And anyway, he came up to me, and Howard Roberts, the writer of the curriculum for the school, which I'd kind of become friends with while I was going there. And anyway, they both came up and they said, you should write a book about that. And I started laughing. I said, I've got enough for 3 or 4 books right now. I said, it's all written out. And I did it all in circles with your right hand and then square, pulling off to a square with your left hand, then a hammer off the triangle with your left hand and pull off with a with the diamond shape. And so I had it all written out like that. So they set me up to bring me into their publisher, Dale Zedenic Publications. And I brought my paperwork in, and I brought an amp and my guitar, and I just plugged it in and showed them how to read it, because the publisher was a guitar player himself. And so I just started going. I just showed them all these examples. And within 10 minutes, I had a publishing deal. And that was it. That was my first book, The Right Touch. And then later on in years, I wrote 2 more books, because I could still write another 3 or 4 books, I mean, it's very, I have that much material of it. I mean, it's ridiculous how much I have, but, maybe someday. Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome though. From such a young age, just knowing that you could do that, it's really remarkable.
Well, it was one of those things where I didn't have any desire to do anything else in life. It's like once I decided to play guitar, that was it. I couldn't even imagine myself doing anything else. So.
Sure. Yeah. Soon after that, I want to say that book was published in 79. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah,
78,
79. Yeah, 79, 8. It might have been 80 when it came out. I think it was 79 though, because that's when I put together the deal anyway. It was 79.
Yeah. So a few years after that, you got into Autograph. Talk about how that band formed and what that was like, just getting into the band and just getting going.
Yeah, there was a few bands, of course, that I played in.
Sure.
And I was doing a bunch of studio work as well. But that came about like everybody in Autograph. We had all played in different incarnations together with different projects. Like me and the singer were in a group called Looker, and then Steve Plunkett, the lead singer, and Randy Rand were playing in a group called Wolfgang. And so we used to get together and jam all the time, just for the fun of it, And but we were all busy too, because me and the keyboard player were playing with Holly Penfield on Dreamland Records. Steve Plunkett was playing with Silver Condor on Columbia Records. Kenny, the drummer, was playing with a group called The Coup on A&M Records. And then Randy Rand was playing with Lita Ford. And so we all had gigs, you know what I mean? But what happened was, when we did a demo, Andy Johns produced the demo from, him and his brother were famous for working with, members of the Beatles and David Bowie and Led Zeppelin and, just the whole gamut. It's just pretty much everybody in England. And so anyway, he produced that demo. And when our drummer, who was jogging with David Lee Roth every morning on Sunset Boulevard, David asked him, he said, I want to hear and this was 1983. And David says, I want to hear what you're doing, And Kenny said, well, I'm still playing with this group called The Coup. And I guess Kenny played it for him, and Roth kind of went, oh, that's kind of cool, But then he played him our demo, and Roth went, oh, wow, this is really good. I really like this material. And when Kenny told him who played in the band, he mentioned my name, and David Roth said, oh yeah, I've heard of Steve before. And then Kenny mentioned Steve Plunkett and Randy Rand, and David's face just lit up. And he said, you guys got to come out and tour with us on the 1984 tour, because Wolfgang, who Steve Plunkett and Randy Rand were in, they were in that group since the early mid 70s, and so Van Halen used to open up for them all the time.
Oh wow.
Yeah. And so David wanted to kind of switch it around and goes, now those guys are going to open up for me for a change. Excuse me. And then so what happened was we thought, you know what, we're done recording with all these other projects. So let's go out and do some shows with them. So we did. We didn't have a name for the band though, so we thought of the name while we were driving from Los Angeles all the way across Interstate 10, all the way to Jacksonville, Florida. And so we thought of a name then. We just thought, that'll work, because we kind of have a signature sound. So the group, the name Autograph kind of worked for the group. So. Yeah,
sure. About that tour, I've heard a rumor that they asked you to stop doing tapping because that was Eddie's thing. Is that a true story, or tell me about
their tour manager came up to me right before the first show, and he said, you're Steve Lynch, right? And he was very aggressive about it. He was poking his finger in my chest and going, why? What's the big deal? And he said, are you the one who wrote that book on the two-handed technique? And I said, yeah, I did that like years ago, and like 5 years ago. And so he says, well, you can't do that on this tour. That's Eddie's thing. And I was like really taken aback, like, I was getting pissy with him. I said, what, I can't use a pick either? Is that Eddie's thing, And I looked at it like, if I did a technique and somebody else did it, I wouldn't care. I'd say, yeah, go ahead, do whatever you want. But no, 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 no. They did not want me doing it on that tour. And so I was really bummed out. I didn't even want to go on stage, but I thought of the rest of the group, and I can't bail on them now, this is a big opportunity. And so I played for a couple of months without it. And then one night I was getting a little bit hammered on Jack Daniels, and I saw Eddie walk by the backstage area. And I said, Eddie, come here. He was hammered on Jack too. So we had a little conversation. And I told him, I said, I'm going to expose you for putting these restrictions on me. And he acted like he really didn't know anything about it. And I said, come on, Eddie. I know exactly where that came from. That came from
Right.
Obviously, because he's a very competitive player.
Yeah.
He was very, very competitive. And I wasn't at all, not at all. I didn't care. And so anyway, by saying that I would expose him for that, then he said, well, you know what, I'll call off the dogs, I'll, just do what you want. So he did. I was able to do what I wanted. But my guitar wasn't going through the PA system. It was only going through my amp on stage. So most people couldn't even hear it.
Yeah.
So this is the way it is when you're playing with a competitive, band. So
Yeah. See, I heard. Go ahead.
It was unfortunate, but you know what? The main thing is we landed a deal with RCA and signed with them backstage at Madison Square Gardens. We're all on tour with them, so the rest is history. So realistically, I thank them for the opportunity, of course, because it worked out very well. But I was just a bit disappointed that happened. And all the other tours that we did, nobody cared what I did,
Yeah. So perfect segue. You Autograph recorded the first album, Sign In Please, on that RCA deal. And obviously that took off. Tell me what that success was like after years of grinding it out for you guys.
That was one of those feelings where you just go, finally, what I mean? Because I was 29 and then Kenny was also 29. But then Steve Plunkett, Steve Isham, and Randy Rand, they were all in their 30s, early 30s by that time. And so we're all just going, and that's kind of late to get signed to a new record deal, you know what I mean? And so we were the older guys on the block. And so we were ecstatic about it, and then it was really cool because the first time we all heard it was when we were on a tour bus, and we go, oh, there it is, turn up the radio. So that was really, really cool to hear it all together, we were all, really, we were doing shots and everything and high-fiving hugging each other. So it was just a really cool feeling, like, wow, we finally got a chance to make it. And then the album took off and went to gold, and we heard turn up the radio all over the place. Everywhere we went, it was being played constantly, not only in the States, but worldwide. So that was really cool.
Yeah, and you still hear that song on rock radio
all the time.
Yeah. I mean, it's just everywhere.
Yeah, absolutely. I get paid more for it now than I did back then.
Sure, right, yeah.
Because there's more digital stations. You know what I mean? They're playing it all over the world. And now they don't have to wait for somebody to go count how many times, like in Brazil, for somebody going to a club and count how many times your song was played. It's all digitized, so you get paid right away for it. Makes a huge difference.
Yeah. And so you ended up getting so much recognition for that album, and particularly that guitar solo you wrote for Turn Up on the Radio, that you won Guitar Solo of the Year for Guitar World Magazine that year.
Yeah.
Talk to me about what it was like for you after growing up idolizing, you said Jimi Hendrix, Jeff Beck. You were seen as a guitar hero. Talk to me about that.
Oh my God. I never even thought of myself like that. I kind of thought of myself like, wow, this is great that I'm in that popularity where people know who I am, and they know of my technique and all this and the books that I wrote and everything. But I never imagined myself being, popular guitarist at all. That wasn't what it's all about. I just wanted to be, as good as I could possibly get and try to write solos that were perfect for the song. But man, I welcomed it. I believe me, I welcomed it because I thought this is icing on the cake. Not only did the album really take off, but also so did my recognition as a guitar player and the respect I achieved. So I was really happy about that.
Yeah, absolutely. You see, I mean, all the time I'll be reading lists and I see your name mentioned all the time in underrated guitar players. And it's just
Yeah.
in your wildest dreams, did you ever think, however many years later we are now since that album came out, that we'd still be talking about it?
Uh, no, actually, I never would have thought that at all. I never did. And so it was kind of surprising, and to be one of the most popular underrated guitar players. I guess that's better than being overrated, right? So
Yeah.
I appreciate all the fan support, no matter what. If people enjoy my playing, then I'm really happy with that.
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously you scored a tour with Van Halen, you toured with Motley Crue and Aerosmith. What are some
Yeah.
memories that come to mind during that time, those tours?
Oh God. Um, there's not much I remember about the Motley Crue tour. That was way over the top. In fact,
Yeah.
people called us the party ninjas. We were the party ninjas. Everybody notices that, including all the bands and everything that we toured with. And these fans, they made up a plaque for us called, the party ninjas, etched in wood. And so we hung that up backstage everywhere we went. That was
Mhm.
our crew hung that up, and so whenever we walked in backstage, there it would be. And then we'd invite people back, and they go, yeah, the party ninjas and everything. And so that was a lot of fun. Aerosmith, that was different because it's when they had to go straight. It was 1985, and they couldn't be drinking or doing any drugs whatsoever because of the trouble they got in, previously. And so we had to play on one side. I mean, we had to be on one side of the arena, and they had to be on the other side. And if we were staying in the same town, which obviously were, we had to stay at a hotel that was the opposite end of town that they were, because we didn't they didn't want us influencing them, which of course we never would have done. But it was such a great tour anyway. Those guys were just super cool. And I just love talking with Joe Perry and Steven Tyler and I remember this one incident, I should say, um, that we were on a tour bus getting ready to leave Providence, Rhode Island, and this girl got on the bus, and she was like all dread hair, different colors and everything, and covered in tattoos and everything, and all these layers of clothing. It was in the middle of the winter. So um, anyway, she got on, and the bus driver just figured, oh, she's here to do an interview because she looked like somebody that would do that. And then so she's on the bus, and we start leaving, Providence, and we said, "Are you going to get off?" She goes, "No, no, no," and so I thought, okay. And she asked a few questions, but then the questions didn't make any sense. And we thought she must be talking. Maybe she's talking about Aerosmith because nothing of what she's asking us makes any sense at all. And she is obviously high on either drugs or alcohol or both. Quite
Yeah.
high. And so we didn't know how to respond to her. And then the bus driver turned around and he said, "What the fuck is that smell?" And we all just pointed at her, because she reeked horribly. Sorry to say, but she did. And so the bus driver pulls over to the side of the road. He says, "Get the fuck off my bus." So she does, and she's swearing at us and everything. You guys, and everything. I don't want to go into it, but then as she's outside alongside the freeway, and there's heavy snow coming down, and as we're driving away, she flips us off with both fingers and goes, "Fuck you, Aerosmith." And we just busted up laughing. We thought, oh my God, she thought she was on Aerosmith's bus. And then when we told that to the Aerosmith guys the next day, they just busted up and said, "Yeah, we get those all the time. That's why we have bus security so that they don't make it on board anymore. So yeah,
Yeah, of course.
I said that was a first for us, and it was quite comical. So
Yeah, of course. So I don't know if this is a touchy subject or not, but I want to ask, there was obviously a big change in the music industry once the 90s hit.
Yeah.
Talk to me about some of those times when it wasn't all, as my dad would say, all hair all the time. Talk to me about some of those times.
Well, okay. Well, as far as what I grew up with, I was a '60s and '70s guy. You know what I
Mhm.
mean? Like I said, we were all older, so we all grew up with those, Pink Floyd, Led Zeppelin, Hendrix and the Rolling Stones and the Beatles and all that. So we weren't always like I haven't a hair metal band. We didn't even really consider ourselves that because we were older. But after in 1988, 89, we were doing demos since our 3 album deal was up for RCA. We were now
Mhm.
talking to Epic Records to sign a 3 album deal with them, and they were very interested in doing that. But then grunge was coming on really heavy, and being from Seattle, I knew what the Seattle sound was, and that was it. It's just the way people sounded. It wasn't that they were creating a new sound. It's just the way Seattle bands sounded. It was long
Yeah,
hair punk. You know what I mean?
yeah, sure.
And so it was just very truthful lyrics, very harsh, about addiction, depression, and all that, and so suicide and stuff. So I just went, yeah, that's just Seattle. That's where I grew up. This is the way the bands are up there.
Mhm.
And so when that happened, I didn't know it was going to come on so strong, but then it did. And so Epic talked to us. They said, boy, I don't know. Nobody's playing any of the '80s stuff anymore. It's all this grunge stuff that's coming out of Seattle. And so I figured, it's time for a change. I thought that the '80s, right at that, well, the '80s were over because at that point it was '89, and so this
Mhm.
new music was coming in. I was disappointed, of course, but I kind of looked at it like, yeah, maybe there's a change for something else. And so it had a good decade, and it's still going today. Everybody still loves the '80s music, which is great. And but then it happened, and so I just went, okay, well, that was the change. And we decided not to do the deal with Epic Records, and they decided not to as well. And so I remember it was December of 1989, the very end of the '80s, and we were in rehearsal, and I just kind of put my guitar, I just turned off my amp and I put my guitar in its case, and I said, guys, it's done. It's done.
Yeah.
And they all agreed. They said, we were just going to do the same thing. Because we're in there rehearsing and we're just kind of looking at each other like, why are we rehearsing and writing these songs still? We know it's over, and it was. And so we just disbanded, and it was very friendly. Everything was very apropos, but we just decided, okay, well, that's it. Maybe later down the road, you never know. But at that point, we didn't see that happening. So.
Yeah. And
So
was
we
that
had a
deflate?
great
Sorry.
time. We had a great time doing it, and I'm so
Mhm.
thankful that we had that opportunity.
Yeah. And was that kind of deflating at the end that that you guys were all willing to walk away from the dream, or?
Yeah, everybody was. Everybody knew that it was time to do something else. Kenny had already joined Dirty White Boy, which was a whole different sounding kind of thing too. And I had been writing uh, material for years that was just not right for Autograph. I just heard it going in a different direction. That's when I recorded, a few years after we split up, I recorded the album Network 23, which was my
Mhm.
solo album. And that's where my writing went. It's completely different from Autograph, but I always wanted to do something that was more experimental. My favorite album is Dark Side of the Moon by Pink Floyd. In 1973, when that came out, I mean, I went, that's it. There's never going to be another album that I listen to that's going to be as good as this. This is a masterpiece, and it was. I still love, albums like, Back in Black, and I love
Mhm.
that kind of stuff too. But that Pink Floyd album, Dark Side of the Moon, and it still is today. I was right. It's the album that's been on the charts for longer than any other album. So, um,
Mhm.
and so I've always, in fact, that's what I still want to do. Is I have a lot of material that leads more into that style of writing, where it's just totally experimental, where you're not thinking about getting radio play or anything like that, or trying to get a record deal. So catering your song toward, you know, something that a record company might be impressed with. I wouldn't sign a record deal anyway. That's not where I'm at now. So
Yeah. And so after that, it took a while for you to rejoin Autograph. You rejoined full time in 2013, 2014? Correct me if I'm wrong.
yeah, it's basically 20. late, it was like October of 2013. And then Kenny, the drummer, was unable to really follow through with it. He had some serious drug problems, and so at that point, I wasn't even sure, and Randy wasn't sure if we wanted to do it because it was going to be the three of us. It was going to be Kenny, Randy, and myself, and then we had to let Kenny go because he wasn't even showing up to rehearsal. And I was flying down from Seattle down to LA to go to rehearsal, and he's not showing up. I'm going, okay, this isn't going to work. And Randy was ready to bail as well. So anyway, then we decided to try a different drummer. We had another singer, but Steve Plunkett didn't want to do it. He was too busy with all of his songwriting, with all these different TV things and everything, and movies. And so he was fine just doing that. And so we did it. We did some shows, and it went well. It was nothing like it was back in the 80s. Any of these bands that are out there playing, 80s bands that are out there playing, then it's nothing like it was in the real heyday. It's nothing like that at all. I mean, it's a lot of fun to get up there. Randy and I had a great time, and that was it.
Yeah, I was gonna ask, so after all those years, were you at all worried that it was gonna flop or people weren't gonna care, but instead you had a great response and people still came out to hear those songs live?
Yeah, they did. Yeah, they wanted to hear the songs live. We had no idea what really would happen. Me and Randy didn't. We thought, oh, let's just give it a try, see what happens. And so we were getting quite a few shows and everything, and people seemed to really like it. So we did it.
Just come out and have a good time, right?
Yeah, exactly. But then, around 2019, that's when my carpal tunnel really started acting up again. I've had a problem with that since I went to the Guitar Institute, back in 1978, and I had some real problems back then. And then throughout my career, I've always had, the problems with that where I have to lay off playing for a while. And I've had 2 operations on both hands for it as well. And so, my doctor said you're going to have to take some time off. You playing live and standing up on stage is killing your hands because of the angle. He knew all about it because he's the one that had operated on my hands before. And so I decided, okay, well, I need to take some time off, because he said if you keep going like this for another 5 years, he said you won't even be able to hold a cup of coffee. He says it's wearing and tearing on not only your carpal tunnel, but also your fingers. The joints in your fingers are wearing down, and they're not exactly connected correctly. And so, and it was becoming really difficult and painful for me to play live. And so I thought, okay, it's time to take some time off, and see what happens. So, but now I'm getting anxious to get out and play again. Just see how my hands react. That's it. So
Yeah,
I think they'll be. I think they'll be fine. My main thing is that I've always been I really play really aggressively. I mean, I really pick hard and I really bend hard and give heavy vibrato and everything. And I've been trying lately to lighten up more, and it seems to really help out quite a bit. And so, just playing with that lighter feel and going, okay, I don't need to murder the strings each time I play. I can ease up a little bit. So,
right. Yeah. So you said you don't want to get into the lawsuit, and so I want to ask you about that. But I did see you won the autograph trademark back and that kind of stuff. Is there any plans for autograph in the future, or or is that up in the air, or talk to me about that?
That's like up in the air, but you just never know. Like I'm still getting the desire to just go out and play those songs again. So right now I'm in the middle of moving. My fiance and I just got a place down in St. Petersburg, Florida, which is about an hour away from where I live now in Tampa. And so we're in the process of that. But once I get settled in there, then I'm probably thinking that I'm going to really start thinking seriously about that, or at least recording some more, something different.
And it doesn't have to be autographed. It can be your solo stuff, like you
Right,
mentioned.
exactly. It can be, yeah, exactly. But we'll see. We'll see which direction I decide to go at that point.
Absolutely. Two more things I want to ask you. Last big one is, what advice would you give for young people who want to make a name in the music industry?
Well, I would say the first thing is stick with it. Write from your heart. Don't try to copy, another another band or another guitarist or whatever. You can get ideas from different bands, but create something, from those ideas, create something of your own, because it's originality, and that really matters. I mean, you look at Led Zeppelin. Nobody sounded like Led Zeppelin. Nobody sounded like Pink Floyd. Nobody sounded like the Beatles. There was nothing like that before they came out. Same thing with the Stones. Same thing with any of these other, the mega bands, the Who. You can go down the line. It wasn't for them. It was all about the music, and it wasn't about getting hit records. It wasn't about that. It was just the music itself. Of course, you want, to generate radio play and generate record sales, of course, but that wasn't the main thing. The main thing was writing great music. And that's one thing that I would tell them, that's the best thing you can bank on. Write and write and write, and put yourself into situations that makes you want to write a song. You know what I mean? Explore as much as you can, travel as much as you can, even if it's just getting in your car and doing a road trip. That's going to inspire you to write something. Look at everything around you. That could be a new song that you're going to be writing about. That's what inspires you. So I really say just write a lot. Don't copy anybody. Like I said, take little ideas from people, but really you got to create your own thing. And when you open up your mind, and you look at everything around you and start writing from your experiences, that's when it all comes together. And oh yeah, one other thing I wanted to mention is that I also have 2 new records on FNA Records. They're the old demos. I don't know if you saw those or not. Yeah,
absolutely.
so it's Send Her to Me and Cloud 10. So 2 different albums of songs that we did pre-Autograph. This is when we were writing in the early days, you know what I mean? And songs that never made it on any album. So they've been selling a lot, but it's FNA Records, and you can go to fnarecords.net or .com, and you can see where to order them and stuff. But they've got tons of merchandise on there as well, and it's really, really gotten off to a good start. So I wanted to mention that in there as well. And then plus my book. I'm not trying to be a salesman here, but Confessions of a Rock Guitarist. I think it's a read for everybody, because it's not just only about music. It's about one musician's life and what it took, and all the trials and tribulations and the struggles they have to go through to make it. And and all the roller coaster rides that you could possibly take are in there. So it's very interesting for a very wide variety of audience, for readers out there.
Awesome. I can't think of a better way to end this interview. Thank you for connecting with me. Thank you for taking the time to do this. I really appreciate it.
Oh, no problem. Thanks for having me on, Colin.
Yes, sir.
All right. Bye-bye now.
Bye.